Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about, well, perhaps not quite that grandiose, but we are certainly in a pickle as far as the world is concerned. So much so that I just had to take a hit, although, to be fair, it was not alcoholic. I was drinking an Arizona energy drink, but it still has the same effect as far as this video is concerned. The simple reality is, our world has gone insane. Even the most respected and stable of institutions, which, while they may not have respect in the conventional sense any longer due to our rampant media secularization, things like the Catholic Church, which are now more associated with child rape than they are with being holy, even though this is an unfair comparison, especially since they don't make a big deal out of the same issues coming from other sectors of society, but it is more common. And for those who say, it's the cover-up, no, it's not, because you make the ripping the altar boys jokes. And let's face it, plenty of other people have engaged in cover-ups like that, and we still trust those sorts of institutions. In fact, we still often trust the institutions themselves. Nevertheless, even those institutions to which we still respect, like Hollywood, we no longer respect, although it's not for those reasons. Those reasons only come up as secondary to our main reason. And that, I think, is something worth talking about. Of course, since I'm making this video for the two of you, I shall be using euphemisms, and I shall be making various word choices that are odd or unusual. I shall be uploading this video to the Shoot a Bit and possibly to other platforms later, but I will also be making another version of this video for the Shoot a Bit where I talk like a normal person. However, you will notice my exaggerations in tones and intonations, and you will notice certain odd choices of words and juxtapositions, which are necessary since Al Gore keeps a heavy monitor upon my little channel, hoping his rhythm is left undisturbed. For Al Gore jealously guards his rhythm, if you know what I mean. I will often shorten it to just Al Gore rather than Al Gore and his rhythm. But I think most people are clever enough to figure out what it is that I'm really saying. Of course, Gaggle and the two of you tend to not like conservatives, and as with most people in society, we have a rather binary way of looking at the world. This binary leaves out a lot of nuance. And in fact, even some people who realize this binary is somewhat unfair still prefer to see it as a sliding scale between right and left, with far right on one side, far left on the other, and most people being closer to the center, with right-wing people being more conservative and left-wing people being more liberal, and then there's the centrists. But even this is not entirely an accurate way of viewing things, since it leaves out a good deal of belief systems that people can and do hold to, which do not evenly fit into this category. And we also tend to think in package deals, meaning that if you believe X, you also believe Y and Z. If you believe A, you will also believe B and C. And of course, if you believe B, you can't believe X, Y, or Z, because that's in a different package. A good example of that would be if you believe in universal taxpayer-funded healthcare, then you are also expected to support same-sex marriage and gay rights, even though those two issues are not really the same thing. You ought to be able to believe in one without believing in the other, because they are not truly the same at all, and the considerations behind them are very different, but it is assumed if you believe in one, you also believe in the other. And of course, when you deal with people who are heavily involved in politics, you also gain people coming up with stereotypes. This is especially prevalent in American politics, where I happen to live in America, of course. Good thing I was educated in a country prior to it going mad. Rule Britannia. God save the King. And God save the Queen, since she was about when I was in there. I'm actually from Tennessee, though, not from England, but I was educated there, so that's not really the point. The point that I'm making here is, and I do hate talking like this, because even unscripted, I normally have a much greater command of my voice. I write for a living, and I give public presentations as part of that, since until AI came along, used to do research. Now they turn it over to the bloody computers. But beyond that, I'm now trying to talk with more pauses and more of those likes, man. More of those generalities, as well as some odd points of speech. And believe it or not, that does tie into the point that I'm making, and I've discussed this before. The tube of view is like being in Star Trek, where ships do sensor sweeps, trying to detect enemies. The only difference is the sensor sweeps sound a lot like another word that, rather than beginning with S, begins with the third letter of the alphabet instead. Well, that is what it is like on the tube of view. Because the people who run the tube of view have, like with my former employers who would hire me for research work, turned it over to AI largely. It wouldn't really matter anyway as much, because the people who run Gaggle are left-wing politically. I'm not saying that this sort of mentality only ever happens on the left. I'm only using it as an example because it is of an immediate effect. The people who run Gaggle are unquestionably left-wing. You can easily find sources for this online, such as James, Kifo, or Alan James, who do exposés, and I don't necessarily think that they are wholly unbiased sources. And when it comes to Alan James, I think you will find that his knowledge wars and related concepts, and the things he says on there are often somewhat more dubious or slanted themselves. I don't necessarily trust him, but that doesn't mean everything he says is false either. Nevertheless, the point I'm making, even though in a rambling, intentionally so, fashion, is that it's not that hard to see that Gaggle, one of the largest social media companies in the world, perhaps the largest. It was certainly the largest at one time, although I don't know if certain Chinese corporations have superseded it or not. I have not checked lately. But Gaggle is most certainly in the left-wing camp of politics. And as such, it tends to show favoritism to left-wing video channels on the tube of view and on its news reporting. Meanwhile, it often buys into certain narratives of right-wingers and of conservatives. And while there are some of you out there who would like to say that right-wing and conservative don't mean the same thing, just like left-wing doesn't mean the same thing as liberal, keep in mind, we are talking about public perception, and ultimately, most people in society use those terms synonymously. Right-wing means conservative, left-wing means liberal, and that is actually the problem that I'm pointing to, because that distinction you may very well wish to tell me about in the comment section if I ever get anyone listening to these videos, isn't the point. The point is that those distinctions exist and are ignored. The point is that there are more options than just left, right, conservative, liberal that we are fed. And it is irrelevant if there are real, actual differences in the terms, if the people who are holding the public discourse don't make such a distinction. And therein leads us to Gaggle, which often silences voices of the type that are conservative. Conservative voices are largely depicted in left-wing media and on Gaggle as hateful, bigoted, racialist, homophobic, and, of course, sexist. And they are, of course, linked to what our society likes to deem religion. And, of course, there's two great binary forces at war there, too. You have religion versus secularism, with secularism being the opposite of religion. Of course, when it comes to the political discourse, one can be religious whilst embracing a secular political ideology, with secularism being promoted, ironically on both sides, as the way to which we can live peacefully with multiple religions. The left, however, has leaned heavily into secularism and is often criticized for creating a secular tyranny. I don't agree with that perception simply because I see secularism as itself a religion and think the way we understand religion is wrong. But I've discussed that before, and I will discuss it again in another video. For now, I'm simply discussing the way things are seen. I'm also using myself, not because I'm a narcissist, not because this video is primarily about me, but because, well, it's my channel and it makes it easier to explain why I'm talking the way I am, while at the same time making the point that I am trying to make. And that is that the Tomb of You is run by people who are left-wing, they are liberal, and they don't like conservatives on the right, and they hold certain stereotypes of them. However, they generally don't actually run the site, they leave it to AI, largely because the site itself is too large to monitor individually, but I also suspect that a great deal of human laziness also goes into this. After all, human laziness also led to the stereotypes that I am discussing with you. The AI views my channel as a right-wing conservative religious channel. As such, I am imagined, of course, to be someone wearing a MAGA hat who thinks of Donald Trump as a new savior to replace Jesus Christ, and who wants white Christian nationalism because I'm, of course, going to be a racist. This perception of me leads, of course, to my channel not being promoted like others are, unless, of course, the AI is fooled into thinking that I'm actually a left-wing atheist, which is why I speak in an angry tone when I speak of atheism these days. Because a lot of atheist channels are dedicated to anger, and it will be either anger or sarcastic voices when discussing how stupid and delusional religion is, and look how dumb the Bible is. And if I mimic that sort of speech pattern from the AI's point of view, both in how my voice intones words, and in the word choices, then the AI will, at the very least, not take my video down, give me strikes, or put up more monitoring, and will often promote my channels. I actually did an experiment on that one. It concluded on the 24th day of June 2024 using the Gregorian calendar. And 2 of my atheism videos actually got far more views than any other, and they are terrible videos which were unscripted, where I talked for over an hour in a rambling, unscripted, unfocused way. The primary reason for making those videos was to test the manner in which I spoke. and it works. So even though I have also done videos on atheism that are more focused, more clear, I will often speak in an angry or sarcastic tone of voice because the AI will assume that I'm an atheist ridiculing religion when I do that. And as such, it will actually promote my channel. Because the AI is not actually human and doesn't really understand what all the words I'm using put together are really saying. Rather, it is listening to the tone of voice, the presentation, and listening to what the words are, and it can recognize certain words, although it does get them wrong. You can check this with the closed captioning. But it does recognize certain words. But it doesn't really know what any individual word actually means in the same way a human would, and it certainly doesn't know what they mean when you put them together in a sentence, but it does know how to relate certain words to other certain words. And the way in which you speak will be compared to how other people speak, so you could be put into your category. So even though no human listening to my videos would assume that I'm an atheist criticizing religion, since my videos were highly critical of atheists, the AI sees me as an atheist being critical of religion. The experiment worked. The experiment worked precisely because the AI is not really something that is so opaque. Once you know who programmed the AI and what their agenda is, and once you understand how the AI functions, by simply comparing words to other words in strings rather than genuinely understanding what the words are. Because ultimately, artificial intelligence, as we call it today, is not really an artificial intelligence. It's really just a giant matchup game. As such, if the AI believes I am a liberal and an atheist, and that I am being critical of Trump, and I am being critical of Christianity, or at least critical of right-wing conservative Christianity, then it will often promote me. Whilst if it sees me as a conservative, therefore a white Christian nationalist, then it won't. And of course there's no middle ground here, because the people who are programming the AI system largely grew up with things like the new atheism and the talks about religion being highly simplistic battles between secularism and the belief in science, reason, and compassion and empathy against religion and its cruelty and tribalism and hate and rejection of science and reason in favor of faith. And largely the AI mimics this, but again, only by matching words with words and tone with tone. The people who run Gaggle, like with the people who run Dasney, which, by the way, has also been caught on film admitting to biases, tend to promote their own political narrative. And while the people who run Gaggle are not necessarily hardcore militant atheists, they certainly sympathize more with the atheists than with Christians, because to them Christians are by and large right-wing conservative, whilst atheists are left-wing. In fact, left-wing Christians only come up when it's useful for either the arguments of left-wingers or the arguments of atheists, it seems. And my point isn't to discuss the fact that right or left, my point isn't to discuss the existence of left-wing Christians. My point is to discuss the perceptions and how my channel tends to be perceived by the AI. And it's not just my channel, which, by the way, is very small in comparison. You see, the reason my experiment worked is because I tried different methods when I started getting strikes on my channel based on video that had no music and was just me talking, rather like this one, but in which I was saying things that were not controversial, since I am not a political commentator by and large. I am not someone who tends to be hostile. I'm not a fire and brimstone preacher. I do criticize militant atheism. Although I do make a point of saying militant atheism, I'm not really generalizing all atheists like I'm often accused of doing. But I am often accused of such. And you know why? I criticize them because they attack Christianity endlessly. I don't attack Muslims. I don't really attack atheists. I'm actually defending Christianity. I don't talk much about Islam being evil, or Jews being evil, or Hindus, because I don't have to. And I will sometimes talk about other social or historical issues as well. And I am also critical of certain Christian groups. But before I started talking this way, before I started with my angry voices, before I started with the odd word choices, I had videos that were being declined to be uploaded on the two of you. Videos that were not at all controversial. Videos that were not remotely bad. Simply because the AI algorithm views me as a MAGA hat wearing far right wing socialist for nationalism, which is of course not real socialism, since socialism is great. And you see this with several channels. You'll notice that other people, if they point something out or talk about a certain story in a certain way, will report that their viewership declined immediately after that, not because their audience responded negatively, because their audience often agrees with the points, but because they were not notified of the video going up. And you will notice that people will make comments which are conspiracy theories, completely not founded in reality, I should have to add for clarity. That you will notice they will talk about a certain topic and they simply won't be promoted, or they will get some sort of content strike of hate speech or something along those lines, whilst people on the other side can say far, far, far worse things and nothing happens to their channels. Gaggle is, of course, not the only platform that does this, but it does do this. And given the world we live in, where we are more and more dependent on social media and on computers for communications with the outside world, you will notice greater and greater and greater pressures being exerted on the people making such content to conform with a certain narrative. Another good example of that would be plague. The plague, which struck during the 2020 vision era, was covered by people who viewed it as nothing more than a flu and not as bad as people said, as well as people who fully agreed and told us to trust the science. And those who gave us the true and wise and honest advice of trusting the science, and who also backed the vaccines, were allowed with impunity to post their content and were promoted. Those who were skeptical of the plague and skeptical of vaccines that were being used to treat the plague, or to protect us from the plague, rather. They were being silenced. At the very least, we would get one of those info boxes, largely linking us to a news site or a fact-check site or to Wikipedia, telling us about how safe and effective the vaccines are and how dangerous the plague was. And often they would not be promoted, or they would be denied altogether because what they're saying is dangerous conspiracy nonsense. Of course, as time went on, those vaccines proved to be, shall we say, complicated, and less safe and effective than we were told. Well, the messenger rate service vaccines are now so visibly problematic that Gaggle does now allow discussions on them, although it is still to some degree muted. But back in the actual plague, you could not talk about it without fear of the axe falling upon your proverbial neck, or at least the neck of your video, and perhaps to add a mark against your very channel. Daniel Trumpet was president then, and Gaggle hates Daniel Trumpet and hated him then, and would often downplay or not promote videos supportive of Daniel Trumpet. Meanwhile, videos supportive of Joe Biden, who shall henceforth be known as what he is, President of the United States, as John Gill. They were accepted and allowed. Conversely, if one were critical of John Gill, one was not allowed. If one were critical of Daniel Trumpet, one was certainly allowed and promoted, very often above even those supportive of John Gill. Of course, given the recent debate performance, we can now use the name a little more freely, which is why, even though oddly phrased, I put the real name of John Gill in this video, but only marginally, because now criticism of John Gill is acceptable, shall we say. And the Al Gore and his rhythm have been duly instructed in how to handle the situation. But that is the main point. I have to talk in circles and in loops and doing these little tricks to get this video up, to tell you a handful of examples that I could have gotten through within 10 to 15 minutes, taking half an hour instead. Speaking in a cartoonish voice, because the powers that be do not like what I say. At least if they understand it, since they're using AI, and again, the reason I talk this way is to evade certain difficulties that come up when you don't trust the science, shall we say. And as the world becomes more and more dependent on social media and computers for our communication and our news, and as more and more we see people relying on this technology, the more power the people who run these companies have. Fortunately, they're losing that power. Fortunately for us, the major corporations are being exposed and are declining. Disney has been exposed for racialist hiring policies and for its agenda of most wholesomeness and promoting mindfulness and being awake. We see people turning away in their bigotry and hate from the right wing. And we see people turning away from other major Hollywood studios and the studio system and Hollywood system overall, because Hollywood is awake, and other people don't like being awake. I think you know, if you have ears to hear, what it is I am actually saying. Gaggle itself is being criticized, though it still has a stranglehold because it holds a majority share in platforming and services, although even that is being risked by other video sharing platforms, other email services, other search engines, although most still build off of Gaggle, so making it not really all that helpful. Gaggle's search results, by the way, are very limited and directed to support the narrative, to support the message. But we are seeing the tide turn. However, the tide is turning slowly, and it seems to be favoring decentralization and independent creation, which will make fact-checking harder, but will also liberalize, if you forgive the coining of a term, the services, so we are no longer enslaved by the powerful few. I haven't much else to say on this topic. I hope to make another video for the sheet of bits, which I shall announce on the tube of you once it is made. It shall be clearer, and I shall speak like a normal person. But for now, I ask you not so much to be directed toward a single point that I wish to make, but to consider all that I have said, and most importantly, how I have said it, and why I said it the way I did. Consider the state of the modern internet. Consider the state of Gaggle. Consider the state of the tube of you. Consider how manipulative certain agencies which run our society are, and consider that it may be time to demand these services be broken up and made into proper utilities, forbidden to engage in such practices. This is S.K. Williams. I've said all that I need to say, so I shall sign off now in my customary fashion. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.